Good evening and welcome to tonight's Undaunted, bringing to the news on church stories. I'm Oyin Opala. Let's begin. Grief hangs heavy over the land as innocent lives are cut down. More than a dozen civilians lost, among them a child barely 2 years old. The pain ripples through families, through communities bound by faith and tradition, through a people forced once again to mourn what they should never have been taken. A voice from traditional authorities rises, and in condemnation denouncing the violence as a descent into cruelty, madness, and inhumanity. The act is rejected without excuse. This act is rejected without excuse, and justice is demanded for blood unjustly spilled. Solidarity is extended to the bereaved, to the broken households, to a community carrying loss too heavy for words alone. Prayers are offered for the departed, entrusting their souls to the eternal rest, while the living plead for an end to the cycle of death and fear. A call echoes towards those with power and responsibility to act, to protect, to restore order, to silence the gods and halt the barbarism that has stolen peace from the land. The longing is simple yet urgent, for safety, for coexistence, for a return to calm and dignity. Amidst ongoing insecurity, the message stands as a reminder that humanity must prevail, that communities must stand together, and that a fractured land can still hope to work towards a shared future rooted in peace, justice, and common destiny. Now let's get the prime headlines. Here are the prime headlines tonight. Fon of Nkanchi Condemns Ndu killings, offers condolence to the Muslim community. Also tonight, reports of a deadly overnight attack in Nsih-Makop Ndu village is on the news. Also tonight, another life lost on neglected Bambili road as Colonial states abandons Ambazonian's infrastructure. French Cameroun responds with Mattresses, Insignificant, food parcels, and silence after 14 were killed in Gidado. Bears 1.6 trillion France CFA loans explains the sudden tax squeeze drawing Ambazonians. On the African scene, Sudan war leaves over 8 million children out of school for nearly 500 days. Save the Children want. Meanwhile, on the global scene, NATO chief says Europe benefited from Trump's pressure on defense spending. Now let's get the news in full briefings. The Fon of Nkanchi village, His Royal Majesty Thomas Kibosi, has expressed profound condolence to the Muslim and Fulani communities of Ndu local government area following the killing of over 12 Fulani civilians, including a 2-year-old child. In a condolence message, His Royal Highness Fon Thomas described the incident as the height of insanity, wickedness, and inhumanity, calling for its firm condemnation and appropriate punishment. In his words, it says it's writing to express his solidarity, sincere and heartfelt condolences to the bereaved family and to the Fulani communities of the divisions. The form stated emphasizing unity and compassion at a time of deep grief. He offered prayers for the victims, asking God Almighty to receive their souls into eternal rest, while urging authorities to intensify efforts to end ongoing violence in Amazonia. the traditional ruler called on the powers that be to act decisively to halt what he termed barbarism and insanity, stressing the urgent need for peace, security, and coexistence. In his words, it says the people must once more find peace and tranquility and live in beautiful nation as one people with one destiny and one common future. The message has been welcomed by community leaders in Ndu as a strong call for solidarity, accountability, and renewed commitment to peace amidst continued security in Ambazonia. Also, another attack in Ndu has been reported. Ndu in Donga two residents of Nsih-Makop village in the local government area, have reported a violent overnight attack that occurred between Tuesday night and the early hours of Wednesday, 21st January 2026, leaving several homes damaged, women sexually assaulted, and even a woman has been reportedly dead. According to multiple community resources, unidentified armed men believed by residents to be Fulani headers from neighboring countries entered the village late Tuesday night. Witnesses say several houses were forcefully broken into, with doors and windows damaged during the incident. Local authorities further allege that a number of women were raped during the attack. One of the victims, a woman from the community, reportedly sustained serious injuries and was rushed to the Ndu Baptist Hospital at Three Corners, Kaka, on Wednesday morning. Community members say she died on the way to the hospital. As of the time of this report, the identity of the attackers has not been independently confirmed by security authorities, and no official statement has yet been released by administrative or security officials in Indo. It is also unclear whether any arrests have been made. Community leaders have condemned the attack and are calling on government authorities to conduct an urgent investigation, provide medical and psychological support to survivors, and strengthen security in Nsih-Makop and surrounding villages. Residents say the incident has heightened fear in areas, particularly among women and children, and have appealed for increased protection to prevent further violence. The situation remains tense as the community awaits an official response from authorities. Now, away from Ndu, let's head into Bambili, where another life has been lost due to the Bambili road. A motorcycle rider was killed last night on the Bambili Bamenda Road after a taxi swayed to avoid a pothole, an all too familiar hazard on Ambazonian roads that have been left to decay while the French Cameroun government looks elsewhere. The death adds to a growing toll paid by ordinary residents for years of deliberate neglect. A fatal road accident occurred last night in Mile 16 and Quim area of Bamenda, chief town of the Midlands zone, claiming the life of a motorcycle rider following a head-on collision with a taxi. The crash happened between 8 and 9 p.m. along the Bamenda-Bambili Road near the Shumas area. According to an eyewitness familiar with the incident, the taxi was coming from Bambili at speed when the driver attempted to dodge a large pothole, veering into the opposite lane and colliding with the oncoming motorcycle. The rider died on the spot. His identity has not been made public, and there has been no official communication regarding the condition or detention of the taxi drivers. Residents say the circumstances surrounding the death are neither new nor accidental. The Bamenda Bambali stretch has been long plagued by potholes, poor drainage, and the absence of basic road safety measures. Calls for a proper two-lane road and routine maintenance have gone unanswered for years, despite the road's heavy use by students, traders, bike riders, and taxis. For many in Bamenda, the incident is being seen as another preventable death caused by Colonial state's neglect. While taxes are collected and transport permits enforced, the infrastructure meant to keep road users alive continues to deteriorate. Across Ambazonians, motorbike riders often pushed into the sector by unemployment bear the brunt of this failure, navigating dangerous roads with no safety net. As anger grows, residents argue that this was not simply a traffic accident, but a consequence of policy choices that leaves the southern Cameroon's communities exposed to daily risk until the French Cameroon treats road maintenance in Bamenda as a priority rather than an afterthought. Such deaths are likely to continue quietly, routinely, and without accountability. And unfortunately, now still in Bamenda, away from the road issues, let's head into water. In Bamenda, access to clean water did not arrive through a colonial ministry, a budget vote, or a French Cameroon's government project launch. It came through one of the citizens' initiative, leaving the colonial state exposed and embarrassed as these whistleblowers and his supporters delivered what colonial public authorities have failed to provide for years. Residents of a neighborhood in Bamenda are now drawing water from a newly constructed borehole, ending years of scarcity that has made life exhausting and unsafe. The project, linked to journalist and whistleblower Nsih-Makop, known for his outspoken criticisms and condemnation of the French Cameroon government, despite being a citizen himself, has quickly become more than a local relief, but a public indictment of colonial state failure. In a message shared online, residents described life before the borehole as very difficult, citing prolonged water shortages that forced families to depend on unsafe sources. Their gratitude was direct and emotional, with some hailing Nsih-Makop as a visionary and openly questioning why a private citizen could solve a problem the colonial government has ignored for decades. The contrast is hard to ignore. While our Republic of Cameroon's authorities routinely announce developmental plans, collect taxes, and deploy security forces across Ambazonian zones, entire communities in Bamenda have remained without basic services such as clean water. The borehole stands as a physical reminder of that neglect and a slap in the face to a government that claims sovereignty but cannot make the most elementary needs of citizens it calls its own. Nsih-Makop himself refused to accept personal praise. In a brief response reading in Pidgin English, he redirected credit to his subscribers and supporters, stressing that the project was funded by ordinary people, not the state institutions or the state government. All right. Of course, he says this is nothing for him. His reaction has only shown that he is ready and is deepened by the embarrassment for BA's government and his incompetent authorities, with no ministry seal, no government convoy, and no official ceremony. Citizens succeed where public administration fails. Observers say the episode exposes a growing reality in southern Cameroon where basic survival increasingly depends on community solidarity rather than state responsibility. All right, away from that, let's get into the Gidado massacre issue. 14 people were massacred in Gidado, Ndu, yet French Cameroon state response has been limited to a small delivery of mattresses, food items, and cash envelopes. An intervention so thin it underscores not urgency but indifference, made worse by Colonial President Paul Biya's continued refusal to address publicly the killings and put an end to the war in Ambazonia. The La Republic de Cameroon's presidency claims to have dispatched a modest package of humanitarian assistance to families affected by the January 14 Gidado massacre in the Hindu community of the Savannah Zone. The aid delivered through its Colonial Ministry of Territorial Administration's emergency services included mattresses, basic foodstuff, household items, and undisclosed cash envelopes. The distribution took place on Wednesday, January 21st, under the supervision of the Colonial Senior Divisional Officer, Judge Magloire Balisikin, who conveyed condolences on behalf of Paul Biya and his First Lady, who have been incommunicado since La Republic de Cameroon's recent presidential election, notably absent, however, was any statement from the colonial head of state himself, despite the confirmed death of 14 civilians, injuries to at least 10 others, and widespread destruction of properties. For survivors, the assistance has done little to address the scale of the devastation. Entire families were killed, homes were burned, and livelihood erased. No plans have been announced for the construction, psychological support, compensation, or long-term security, leaving affected residents to rely largely on their own means and community support. The limited scope of the aid has reinforced long-standing grievances in Amazonia, where mass violence is often barely followed by symbolic relief rather than sustained state intervention, where significant public funds continue to be allocated to colonial security operators and political priorities elsewhere. Victims in Gidado receive support that barely covers immediate survival needs. Paul Biya's silence has further aggravated public frustration. In a country where official communication is swift, when its authority is challenged, the absence of a direct address following the killing of civilians has been widely interpreted as disregard. Meanwhile, mourning continues in Gidado and families have been abandoned to themselves, left to rebuild amidst the grief, scarcity, and unanswered questions. Now let's get into neighboring French Cameroon for the issue of the tax. In neighboring French Cameroon, Colonial President Paul Biya's decision to contract a new 1.6 trillion franc CFA loan has exposed the real reason behind La République du Cameroon's sudden wave of tax hikes. A debt-ridden state shifting the cost of its borrowing onto southern Cameroon citizens at a time when Ambazonians are barely surviving war, displacement, and economic ruin. The authorization granted to the Colonial Minister of Finance to raise up to 1.6 trillion francs CFA in fresh loans has shed light on the BS government's recent tightening of taxes and administrative requirements, measures now trying passports, vehicle registrations, imports, and informal economic activities to tax compliance are no longer isolated reforms, but part of our broader efforts to generate cash to survive and expanding debt burden. French Cameroon's public debt stands at about 14.442 trillion francs CFA, roughly 47% of the GDP, with debt servicing consuming an even larger share of their national budget. Instead of confronting corruption, waste, or unchecked colonial military spending, the occupational state has opted to intensify revenue. The revenue collection from an already suffering population, starting with those least able to absorb it. Ambazonians are set to bear the heaviest cost. The Savannah, Midland, and Atlantic zones remains locked in a protracted war that has destroyed livelihoods, displaced thousands, and crippled local economies. Yet, these same people are now being subjected to stricter tax enforcement and rising fees as if war had never stripped families of income, property, and basic security. While loans are negotiated in Yaoundé and projects announced on paper, Ambazonian communities see little returns. Roads remain impassable, health facilities under-equipped, schools closely or heavily militarized, and electricity unreliable. The recent tax increment, therefore, reads as a transfer of state failure into war-affected populations. Ambazonians are being asked to bankroll debts accumulated in their name while living under conditions of war that the same colonial government has failed to resolve. By expanding borrowing and tightening taxation simultaneously, the BA administration has deepened an already unequal burden. Unfortunately, communities already afflicted by the war are expected to pay for a system that continues to neglect it, police it, and push it further into economic exhaustion. Right after the break, when we return, we'll head into Sudan, where the Sudan war has left over 8 million children out of school for nearly 500 days. More than 8 million children in Sudan have been denied access to education for nearly 500 days as a result of the ongoing conflict, according to a new statement released on Thursday by the international NGO Save the Children, underscoring what it described as one of the longest and most devastating school closures in the world. The children, nearly half of the Sudan estimated 17 million age population have gone approximately 484 days without certain foods in a classroom since fighting erupted in April 2023. The prolonged disruption, the organization said, is putting an entire generation at risk of long-term harm, including increased child labor, early marriage, recruitment by armed groups, and permanent learning loss. Sudan has been gripped by a brutal power struggle between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces, a conflict that has devastated infrastructure, displaced millions, and pushed the country deeper into humanitarian crisis. Schools across large parts of the country have been damaged, destroyed, occupied by armed groups, or repurposed as shelters for displaced families, making education impossible for millions of children. Children in Sudan are paying the highest price for a war they did not choose, Save the Children said, warning that the prolonged absence from school is eroding not only children's education but also their safety, mental health, and future prospects. The organization noted that many children have now missed nearly two full academic years, making reintegration into formal schooling increasingly difficult. The education crisis is unfolding against the backdrop of widespread displacement, food insecurity, and limited access to basic services. More than half of Sudan's population is now in need of humanitarian assistance, with children among the most vulnerable. Save the Children called on all parties to the conflict to protect schools and civilian infrastructure and urged the international community to increase funding for emergency education programs. Without urgent action, the group warned Sudan risks losing an entire generation to the consequences of war. Education is not a luxury. The education organization said it is a lifeline, and for millions of Sudanese children, that lifeline is sleeping away. And right after the break, when we return, we'll head into the global scene where NATO chief says Europe benefited from Trump's pressure on defense spending. NATO Security Secretary General, I beg your pardon, Mark Rutte said on Wednesday that Europe should ultimately welcome the return of the US President Donald Trump, urging that Trump's confrontational speech towards allies has forced European nations to take greater responsibility for their own defense. Speaking during a panel discussion at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Rutte acknowledged that his comments might be unpopular among European audience, but insisted that Trump's leadership had produced tangible results for NATO alliance. In his words, he said, "I'm not popular with you now because I'm defending Donald Trump," Rutte said, "but I really believe you can be happy that he is here because he has forced us in Europe to step up, to face the consequences that we have to take care of more of our own defense." Rudd argued that years of US frustration over unequal burden sharing when NATO failed to produce meaningful change until Trump applied sustained political pressure. He credited the president's blunt warnings, including threats to reduce US security commitments, with compelling European governments to increase military spending and preparedness. "No way without Donald Trump. This would never have happened," Rudd said. "They are all on 2% now," he added, referring to NATO's long-standing target that member nations spend at least 20% of their gross domestic product on defense. Trump has repeatedly criticized European allies for relying too heavily on American military power while underinvesting in their own forces, a message he delivered forcefully during his first term and has renewed since returning to office. While his rhetoric has strained relations with some allies, Ross suggested the results speak for themselves. The NATO chief's remarks come amid renewed tensions backed by Trump's comment about Greenland, an autonomous territory of Denmark, which the president has suggested holds strategic importance for US and allied security despite the controversy. Downplayed their dispute and emphasized that the broader outcome has become a more assertive and capable Europe within NATO would frame the shift as essential at a time of heightened global instability, pointing to ongoing security challenges on NATO eastern flank and the need for Europe to shoulder a larger share of collective defense. His comments underscore the growing recognition within NATO that Trump's unconventional approach, while often divisive, has accelerated changes that alliance leaders have sought for more than a decade. Whether viewed as cohesive or catalytic, Root argued Trump's pressure has reshaped Europe's defense posture in ways that may strengthen NATO in the long run. That's it for tonight's Undaunted. But before we go, let's take a look at the headlines of today. Tonight on Undaunted, we told you that the Fon of Nkanchi Condemns Ndu killings, offers condolences to Muslim community. Also tonight, residents reportedly overnight attack in Nsih-Makop in the local government area. Another life lost on neglected Bambili Road as Colonial state abandons Ambazonian infrastructure. Also tonight, French Cameroun responds with mattresses, insignificant food parcels and silence after 14 have been killed in Gidado. We told you tonight that BS 1.65 trillion France CFA loans explains the sudden tax squeeze drowning Ambazonians. Sudan war leaves over 8 million children out of school for nearly 500 days. Save the Children once or was on the African scene and on the global scene. NATO chief says Europe benefited from Trump's pressure on defense spending. That's it for tonight's Undaunted. Bringing to the news untold stories. On behalf of Barrister Mbese, who has been unavoidably absent on tonight's production, is good night and God bless.